All right, hi guys. We are going to work through lesson 10 in unit 2, and we're not going to do the whole thing. There's an activity here that I love to do that we just can't manage to pull off this year. So this is about graphing, graphs of proportional relationships. What do you remember about graphing? We talked a little bit about this in class. Do you remember how to graph points? So we'll notice we have all positive values here. We'll talk about negative numbers a little bit more later in the year. But this task is asking us to plot these points. Do you remember how to do that? When we plot points, we call that a coordinate pair. The x comes first and the y comes second. The x is our left-right direction and the y is our up-down direction. So we start at 0, 0. We call that the origin. And we move from there. So this very first point asks us to plot the point 0, 10. So that means I'm going to go 0 in the left-right direction and then 10 in the positive up-down direction. So positive 10 means I'm going to go up 10. So over 0, up 10, I go right here and I put a point. The next one is 1, 8. So I'm going to go 1 in the left-right direction, positive 1. And then up 8, and I'm going to put a point right there. That's 1, 8. So I've done that one, done that one. Next one says 2, 6. So I'll go over, starting from 0 again. I'm going to go over 2 to the right, 1, 2, and then up 6, which would put me right there. Starting to see a pattern. Can you graph for me those next 2 points? So 3, 4, and 4, 2. Okay, so pause for a second, graph those points. And then our important question, what do you notice about the graph? Give me 2 things that you notice about that graph, okay? So give me 2 different statements, 2 things that you notice about the graph. And now we're going to work through the next task, which is about t-shirts for sale, okay? And it's important that we understand what's happening here. It says some t-shirts cost $8 each. Use the table to answer these questions. So here's our table. We have X and Y in this table, and we notice the X's are going up by 1, and the Y's are going up each time by 8. The question is, what does X represent? So in that table, what would the X stand for? And again, we're talking about these t-shirts being sold. Then what does Y represent? See if you can figure out what the Y value would represent. And then part C asks, is there a proportional relationship? And we know how to find that out. We're going to divide, 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 divide. Do we always get the same thing? Is that a proportional relationship? So important questions. What does X represent? What does Y represent? And is that relationship proportional? And then down below, on the table, we're going to graph those pairs. 1, 8 would go over 1 and up 8. And what I have to notice here is what I'm counting by. So if this is 10, what am I counting by? It looks like every one of those lines going up is worth 2. 2, 4, 6, 8. There's 10. 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. Okay, so each one of those little lines is worth 2. So if I'm going to plot the point 1, 8, I'll go over 1. And then let's see if I can blow this up for myself so I can count a little better. Over 1 and up 2, 4, 6, 8. And I'll put a point there at 1, 8. The next point is 2, 16. So I'll go over to 2 and up. Let's see if that was 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. And I'll put a point there. And you graph the rest of those for me. Okay, and again, what do you notice about the graph is the important question here. What do we notice? This task 10.3, I love this task. I usually love to do this with classes. We just don't have the ability to do that this year. It's a really good one, thinking about graphs and categories of graphs and how graphs look different from each other. We just don't have time to do that this year, unfortunately. So let's read through the lesson summary here, okay? One way to represent a proportional relationship is with a graph. Here's a graph that represents different amounts of the situation, and we're told here blueberries cost $6 per pound. And here's what we notice about the graph. Notice that it's a nice straight line, and then it goes through the origin. It goes through 0, 0. Different points on the graph tell us, for example, that 2 pounds of blueberries cost $12. So I notice as I'm looking at the graph what the x and the y-axis are labeled as. Those units are important to us. So I know that when I go over 2, that means I'm going over, that represents 2 pounds. And when I go up the 12, that means 2 pounds of blueberries cost $12. If I went over 4.5 units and up to 27, that would tell me 4.5 pounds of blueberries cost $27. Okay, so those things that are labeled on the axes, those units, are important to us. Sometimes it makes sense to connect the points with a line, and sometimes it doesn't. We could buy, for example, 4.5 pounds of blueberries or 1.87 pounds of blueberries, so all the points in between the whole numbers make sense in this situation. Sometimes that doesn't make sense, like if it was number of people on the x-axis. You couldn't have 4.3 people, so sometimes graphs are just represented by individual dots instead of a line. There's a name for that. A graph like this is called a is called a continuous graph, sorry. A line that's just a bunch of points is called a discrete graph. And you can take a whole math class that's about discrete graphs. Kind of interesting stuff. And we'll finish up this lesson summary. If the graph represented the cost for different numbers of sandwiches instead of pounds of blueberries, again, it might not make sense to connect the points with a line, because sometimes we can't buy 4.5 or a fractional value. Okay, so sometimes we connect them, sometimes we don't. Graphs that represent proportional relationships all have a few things in common, and this is the big takeaway here. The points that satisfy the relationship lie on a nice straight line, so they won't be all over the place. They won't be curvy like this one is. That is not a proportional relationship because it curves. And also, the line that they lie on passes through the origin, passes through 0, 0. This does not represent a proportional relationship. It's a nice straight line, but it doesn't go through the origin, not proportional. Again, curvy here, not proportional. So these two things are examples of graphs that are not proportional relationships. Okay, and I think that is it for today. You are going to do a few of the practice problems for lesson 10, and then that's it. It's Friday. Have a wonderful weekend. Make sure you do Schoology number 2 due on Monday, guys. All right, thanks. Bye-bye.